Hi everyone and welcome to the guide for the higher tier paper. This guide's looking just at the reading section, so if you want guides on the writing section you need to click on the links for those instead. Okay, so it's just a general overview to help you understand what to expect from the paper. So we'll start with the length of the exam. Now this is for the reading and the writing sections. So if you have normal time, that is 2 hours. However, if you get 25% extra time, that's going to be 2.5 hours. And if you get 50% extra time, that makes your total time 3 hours for this English exam. Okay, so let's have a look at the reading paper itself. You're going to be getting 2 reading texts that are linked on a theme or a topic. And that's always the same every year. What we don't know is the topic you're going to be given. Here's an example of one. So you've got a profile of Lewis Hamilton as one of the texts that you're given for this exam. And linked to that, you also get an article that's taken from a slightly later point in Lewis Hamilton's career when he's received some success and fame already. And that's an article taken from a newspaper or a magazine. Now I want you to just pause for a moment and have a think, because it might seem obvious what links these articles, but you might need to dig a little bit deeper for the higher paper. The texts clearly are linked on the topic of Lewis Hamilton. They're giving 2 different views that have some similarities, but because they're taken at slightly different points in his career, there are some subtle differences. And just beware, because sometimes they're not just linked through similarities, they're linked through differences. Let's focus on the questions then. So what you've got here is a very typical question paper. You've got 4 questions and some other information on the page. You can see that there's some text in italics or slanted letters at the top. There's some text in bold telling you where to look for information. And then in the square brackets there's the mark allocations for those questions, so you know how much the questions are worth. So at the top of the page then, that slanted lettering, that italic lettering, actually tells you when these articles were written, and it's really important that you pay attention to this information because often it can give away key details, because the timing of when the articles were written is really important in this case. Question 1 then tells you to look at the profile by Paul Kelso and asks you what sort of person Lewis Hamilton is. And it reminds you there you've got to use the text to support your answer. So in other words, give evidence or quotations. It's also asking you to use inference or dig deeper, isn't it? So I would suggest the best plan for answering this question is to use what we call in my class point, evidence and explain. So you're finding the points, you're selecting your evidence from the text and explaining your answer. Question 2 then tells you to look at the other article in the resource material and asks you how Paul Scott shows Lewis Hamilton's reaction to fame and success. Now any question starting with how should send alarm bells ringing in your head that you need to talk about the writer's techniques. So it's not just finding the evidence and explaining this time, but also talking about the writer's techniques. I'm making another guide video on aphorist techniques, so look out for that one. You then have to look at the second page of the article, and it says, what do you think and feel about Lewis Hamilton in this part of the article? Again, you get that reminder to use the text to support your answer. But this really is asking for you to make inference, to give opinions about the text. And that's always supported opinions. So you're giving those opinions, but you are also finding evidence to back them up and explain. And as long as you can justify what you think, you should be able to pick up marks for this question. Question 4 is always the hardest question on the paper because it requires you to look at both texts, and that's a skill people often find quite difficult. And this asks you to organise your answer in 2 paragraphs using the following headings. You need to pay attention to those instructions because if it's asking, that's what it's expecting you to do. The skills you're using here is finding information and being able to make cross-references, so taking information from both texts and putting them together. So finally, my 4 top tips for succeeding in this paper. Read the questions first, highlighting keywords so you know what you're looking for before you start reading. Read the first article and then answer the question. Answer all of the questions using point, evidence and explain. In some you're going to have to reference techniques as well. Some schools you call that PETA, and you might have other acronyms for that as well. And finally, leave the most time to answer that comparison question. It's really important there that if you get stuck, don't panic, just move on to the parts that you can do.